It's one of the state police shy. All right. Welcome, everybody. This day has been a long time coming, and I think that by the end of our presentation today, you'll understand why. I'm going to try to move as quickly as I can, but I'll give you a warning that for those of you who have seen the report, it's a long report. It nears 300 pages. The appendices about the same volume. I'm going to move as fast as I can, but this could take a little bit of time. Before I begin, rather than wait to the end, there are some people who really need acknowledgement. There are many survivors that you've heard from, I'm sure, in the past. You'll hear more from in the future. Some are referenced by name in the report, some are not. Not every survivor wanted to be named. We know there are survivors of clergy sexual abuse in Rhode Island that still haven't come forward. And that is just the reality when these crimes are committed. But I want to start by recognizing the survivors that are in the room, and they are Dennis LaPrade, Claude LaBouffe, and Robert Houlihan. They're here. All three of you have my gratitude for your courage and bravery in working with us and putting this report together. And it really means a lot to the team and to me that you're here. So thank you. I also want to thank, as I mentioned or implied a minute ago, I want to thank the survivors that are out there that are not in the room, those that we know of and those that we don't. Know that we spent the time to make this report as strong a work product as we could because we felt like you deserved it. And none of us on the team that put it together, between the state police and our team, myself included, wanted to issue a report that did not do the crimes and the survivors justice. I also forgot to mention two survivors. I didn't forget, it's the wrong phrase. I neglected to mention, but they are very much on my mind because they are good friends of mine. And they are Dr. Hub Brennan and Dr. Ann Webb, who I have walked this journey with. We've walked it together in many ways. Hub, where are you? There you are. Dale, Hub's wife. I remember, Hub, when we sat down, I think I was still running in a coffee shop in Jamestown, and you told me, I wasn't sure why we were meeting, I think at the time. I knew you were a physician, and I thought we were going to talk about healthcare, and we talked about this, and the impression that you and Ann have made on me in that 8+ years now. Just know that our conversations will stay with me for a very, very long time. I'm grateful for your friendship. I want to thank Carol McEntee, who's been a fighter here, has yelled at me for not moving fast enough on many occasions, sometimes right in this room. And I hope, Carol, that you've now seen the report, and I hope that it's something that you're proud of, and you are a part of it for sure. Mark McKinney, you've been a champion on this issue, and a friend. Both of you have been good friends to me over the course of my political career. I'm grateful for that and your keen interest in this issue here. The legislation that you've sponsored and have championed is legislation that you'll see we refer to in our report, that we recommend passage of, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. All right, so here at the office, when we started this back in 2019, pre-COVID, if you can believe it, it seems like another lifetime ago. There have been a series of people that have worked on this matter, on this report, and I'm going to read from the bottom of the list to the top because in some ways it's chronological. So Chris Joseph, who actually went to high school with my eldest son, and grew up in South Kingstown, needed a job after college, and a really smart young man. I think he went to Boston College, if memory serves. And anyway, I mention him because he was the first person that we put on it who was not a lawyer. He has since gone to law school and is practicing law, so that gives you a sense of how long this has taken. So I guess I'm in a sense, casting a little shade at myself by saying, going through all that. But Chris really got this rolling. Wyeth Taylor worked on this as a paralegal. She's now writing novels. So Wyeth and Chris, you're out there somewhere, and thank you. Ryan Holt, a former Special Assistant Attorney General in the office, my first legislative aide, worked on it. Aidan Giusti worked on it. Farron Fuquay was a policy analyst, has helped on this report. Allison Fonseca, Jonathan Burke, Steve Dambrook, Penelope Murphy, Sean Malloy, Andrea Morrow, Patrick Dolan, and last, but most important, Adee Goldstein, who has marshaled this project from the beginning and has worked countless hours on it herself. I also want to acknowledge the State Police, led by Lieutenant Heather Palumbo. We have other members of their Special Victims Unit here, Detective Austin Leverrier, Detective Leverrier is here, Detective Lindsay Laurie, Detective Jeffrey Minoz, and Detective Sergeant Kyle Draper, who's done a ton of work with this office on important cases over the years that I've been Attorney General. So, all right, so with that, we'll get started. All right, so some of you may have seen this slide as we were getting ready to start. The bottom line is, as I'll get into, is this report was done by recreating history from a lot of documents that the diocese produced to us. We did not have the benefit, as I'll get into, of speaking to diocesan witnesses. So the team really had to go through over 250,000 pages of records, get them organized, go through them, understand them, piece them together to be able to tell this very complicated 75-year story. The contents of the report, we'll just go through the overview here. There's a letter from me to the public that I won't really spend any time on. It's there for folks to read if they like. There's an executive summary. Chapter 3 is the legal framework and analysis, which I won't spend a lot of time on there. It's included in the report so that the public will have a sense of the various laws that apply in this area, both to the church potentially and individual priests. That law is complicated. I prosecuted cases using those laws. The best approach, if you're a prosecutor, is to understand your facts and then go to the law, because to try to keep it all in your head is difficult as studying for the bar exam. Chapter 4 is an overview of our investigative findings. Chapter 5 covers the time frame from 1950 to 2000, when we begin, as we'll see, to see change on the part of the diocese, driven in part by survivors coming forward with the courage that they did, and the church as a whole, from the Vatican and across the nation, beginning to understand they had to change their historical approaches. Chapter 6 goes over the past failures of the diocese to report child sexual abuse complaints to law enforcement. Chapter 7 goes through the diocese reforms and responses to clergy abuse from 1990 to the present. As we'll see, those reforms were initially, I would describe them as attempts. As time went on, they got better, but there is still considerable room, from our perspective, for improvement. That's reflected in Chapter 8, our concerns with their modern responses to the clergy abuse crisis. Chapter 9 contains our recommendations to the diocese. Chapter 10 are our legislative recommendations. We conclude with an epilogue. Then we have a series of appendices and I recommend them to you. I think as important as the report itself, which is, you'll see, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, is a narrative. Appendix A, which is which are the clergy summaries, really lay out priest by priest what happened here, meaning what these priests were credibly accused of, in some instances charged with by indictment or otherwise, and equally important, what the diocese's response to it was. And the takeaway that I have from these summaries is, there are many. You know, it's the horrible abuse in its own right. You know, you have to pause there, because what these priests did to children is, of course, life-changing and life-lasting. But what the diocese did in response to the allegations in history is striking. And it's strikingly awful. And it's awful in the sense that these priests were shuffled around and put in positions by the diocese so that they could abuse more children. And you see that over and over and over and over again. And those summaries for each priest tell you where those priests were assigned, over what dates, and then in the narrative that follows, what they were accused of credibly, and then what the diocese did, most importantly, didn't do in response. Okay, let's see here. Try and move it up. There we go. All right. Okay. So, you know, one of the questions, I guess, from the start is, why do the report? I think it's, if you read it, it's obvious, but and we'll get into some of the other reports done by other AGs. But you know, my takeaway, you know, I've worked on this report now personally twice. You know, really going through it with a pen and with an editor's point of view, and you know, once back in the spring, and then once again in the last month or so, and you know, I think the diocese, you know, based on what I've read in recent weeks, would have you believe that what you're about to hear and what you've read or are about to read is old news, in a sense, that it's history, that it doesn't matter anymore because everything is working out great now. And there's no question that the risk to children today is much lower than it was. But the public deserves to know the truth, in my view. And they deserve to know it as a complete story, not a series of short stories that are told over time or over decades as priests are charged, or as the media takes a particular interest over a certain period of time. The public deserves to know the whole story from 1950 to 2026, to see it all in its raw emotion and horror and impact. And it's not, in some sense, it's a history, but it is certainly a living history. Because Hub Brennan is still alive, and Ann Webb is still alive, and Dennis LaPrade is still alive. Survivors out there are still alive. This is a living history, and it will live on as long as victims of clergy sexual abuse live themselves, and as their family members live. Because there's no question, I think, if you talk to survivors, that the way that they've been impacted impacts their own families as time goes on, both horizontally, meaning siblings, parents, which is a complicated question in its own right, but also their children. All right, so let's go through the executive summary. So, really quickly. So, when I took office, my then colleague in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, had just issued in 2018 his report on sexual abuse in Pennsylvania. And in the wake of that report, AGs around the country, including me, bolstered by conversations that I've already alluded to with friends and people interested, we felt that we should do our own. And as you can see, there have been several that have been done around the country over the last number of years. You know, states have done these in different ways. Pennsylvania, as I'll get into more in a little bit, used a grand jury, which I think I wish we had access to, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Here in Rhode Island, grand jury investigations, unlike in Pennsylvania, are secret. And those of you in the media, I think, fully understand what that means. We could have spent 6+ years investigating this, charged 4 priests as we did along the way, and at the end of the day, what you would know about what we found would be what was ever presented in those indictments. And if those 4 priests pled guilty, you would frankly know very little. You would know what bishops between 1950 and say 1990 did in response to allegations of clergy sexual abuse. You wouldn't know the scope of allegations against priests that are now dead. What you would know is that 4 priests, the 4 priests that we've indicted, we allege, and they haven't been proven guilty, but we allege committed crimes. But that's all you would know in Rhode Island. In Pennsylvania, they had the distinct advantage of having a grand jury, which allowed them to, I think, do an investigation that I would have, the kind of investigation that I would have preferred to do, but was not in a position to do, because we don't have that. We don't have the same kind of law here that we have, that they have in Pennsylvania. Okay. Let's make sure. I'm sorry, I keep going back and forth, but it's not as responsive as I'd always like it to be. All right, so sort of high-level findings, and you'll hear this a few times here. From 1950 to 2022, what we found is that the diocese employed 75 credibly accused priests who reportedly abused over 300 children. Our list has 20 additional priests that the diocese list does not have, and we'll spend a little more time on that. I've already alluded to the harm that this abuse caused, and you can't understate it. And historically, what we saw, particularly under Bishops Gelano and Bishop McVinney, was that this clergy abuse was concealed. What we also saw was that the diocese failed to consistently refer to law enforcement allegations of clergy sexual abuse. And while the situation has improved considerably, we believe, as I've said earlier, that more work is necessary. And we propose reforms to the diocese that will advance transparency, accountability, and public safety. The investigation had 4 main goals. The first was to provide an overall account of what occurred between 1950 and 26 really, to describe the diocese's response to the clergy sexual abuse of children, to identify perpetrators who could still be prosecuted and charge them by criminal indictment, and to propose reforms and accountability measures. Yeah, I already mentioned the amount of records that we looked at, 250,000 pages. That's a lot for those of you who haven't done a document case. Join a large law firm, as I did at the beginning of my career, and you'll certainly appreciate how much work that is. We talked to, or had either talked to or exchanged emails with over 150 we had over 150 confidential contacts with survivors. We talked to a lot of people that were impacted by this clergy abuse scandal. And as I mentioned, we charged 4 new cases. We added a quote here from the report. And I think it's important, my takeaway from this quote and why we put it in the report and why it's in this slide deck is, and I'll talk a little bit about it more as we get towards the end of the report, but I feel like, for what my view is worth, if you're the Diocese of Providence and you're listening, is this is a scandal that you need to own and you need to fix. And we can't slow walk solutions, and we can't slow walk justice, and we can't slow walk compensation, and we can't slow walk help. We have to own it. You have to own it. The diocese has to own it. The way other dioceses around the country have begun to own it. You know, the takeaway from this slide, some of it I've already covered, is that we know that a relatively small number of victims, survivors come forward. And so the scope of the abuse that we're about to cover is likely much larger than what we were able to establish. And so the office may at some point update this report. And one thing we see, and we'll get into it a little bit later, is that allegations, credible allegations of clergy sexual abuse often come much later. And so we won't know the extent to which this problem has been fixed, potentially for another decade or more, because survivors will still come forward and are still coming forward. And that's why I said earlier, this is really a living history, both because survivors still live and their families still live, but also because the fallout from the diocese's failure to protect children, we may see more fallout from that in terms of additional survivors in later periods of time than we see right now. Hopefully we don't, but we could, because we just don't know when those survivors will come forward. All right, here's the legal framework, and I'm really going to move quickly through this. You know, the bottom line is that for individual priests, one of the challenges was, are they alive? And still, obviously, if you're not alive, you can't be prosecuted. So because much of the conduct here was back a number of years, identifying priests that were still alive and against whom we could build a case to prosecute was a challenge. That doesn't surprise me for a lot of reasons, but we did look at, obviously, wherever we had an allegation and we had a priest alive, we considered whether or not we could make a case. One of the challenges was availability of witnesses. Another challenge was, in some instances, statutes of limitations. Not always, because for some crimes against children, there are no statutes of limitation. For sexual contact, as opposed to penetration, however, there is. So, not to be overly graphic about it, but let's face it, these are graphic things we're talking about. Sexual contact, touching, for example, of the genitals of a child, in some instances is subject to a far too short statute of limitations, which we have been trying to change in the General Assembly now for some time. I believe we've gotten it, I don't want to fault the chamber here, but we've gotten it through one of the chambers, but not the other. I believe we've gotten it through the House, but not the Senate. Mark, I know you've been a champion of it, or I hope you have. You're always on the right side of these issues, so that is certainly something that would be helpful not only in this context, but in many, many others. But the statutes of limitations here were also an issue with respect to bringing cases against priests, which is why we were only able to bring four important cases for sure. But when you consider that we added 20 additional priests to the diocese credibly accused list to get it to 75, yet we're only able to bring 4 individual cases. Again, most of that was because those priests were deceased. With respect to the diocese itself, we looked look, as a prosecutor, you always go into a set of facts where there is clearly wrongful behavior to see whether there is a criminal case to be made. And so here we looked at cases potentially against the priests themselves, and then we looked whether the diocese or its leaders could be held individually responsible. Now, certainly institutions can be held criminally responsible. I was involved in a case where Lincoln Park, now Twin River, was criminally charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office when I was there, the case I worked on, and convicted and fined. And so the diocese as an institution potentially can be charged with a crime, as can leaders of the diocese. The challenges there were numerous. Among them were to bring a case against an institution, speaking very generally here. You need to show that an individual, meaning a person, to make that institution liable, are not only themselves liable for committing a crime, but did so in furtherance of the interests of the institution, and also have contemporaneous intent. And so what you see in this report are bishops covering things up, but what we don't see are bishops advocating for child sexual abuse. And that's an important distinction. That's an important distinction for determining whether or not the institution itself or the leaders could be charged with things like conspiracy or aiding and abetting liability or RICO or some of those kinds of theories. Theories that I think were a little bit closer were things like harboring or misprision of a felony, which generally speaking means that you know that a crime has been committed and yet you don't take any steps to do anything about it. But even there are some issues, particularly in harboring with shared intent, and also the statutes of limitations with respect to those crimes is very short, it's 3 years. We do have a mandatory reporting statute in Rhode Island that many of you, I'm sure, will have on your mind as I'm making these remarks. That is a relatively recent statute, which wasn't in play back when these allegations came forward. And there is also a relatively, I believe, a short statute of limitations issue there. But that really was less about the statute and more about the timing of the allegations that we were working with here. So there are a number of slides in the report that go through the various legal theories, because I want you to know, and I want the public to know that's listening out there, that we considered every possible theory against any living priest and against the diocese as an institution, and living leaders of the diocese, because that's what we do. And if we have a theory and we believe we can prove a case, we'll bring it. But we did not conclude that here with respect to the diocese or any living leaders. So let me just move through this. I'm going to just skip through these slides. The slides will be made available to you. And for those of you who have a keen interest in the law, like Tim White, have at it. That Masters of Law has got to get you something, Tim, right? I'm sure you already know this. You could have written these slides. All right, so let's just skip through these here. And this just goes through some of the statute of limitations for some of these other offenses. And our conclusions are not unique to us. Of all the other attorneys general around the country that have investigated dioceses, to our knowledge at least, these, certainly the ones that I've identified already, have not brought a criminal case against the diocese. And there was some indication that perhaps a DA somewhere did, but the case was not successful. So institutional liability in this context is difficult, if not impossible, to establish. Okay, an overview of the investigative findings. I hope this won't be overly repetitive. This is an important concept here. The grand jury and no grand jury. For some of you, this is a favorite topic of mine. I would have much preferred to use the grand jury than go the route that we took. So we really had two options when we started. And one was, all right, impanel a grand jury. Probably would have been the statewide grand jury because we would have needed it for a long period of time. The statewide grand jury can sit for months at a time. Usually the county grand jury sit for 6 weeks. So we probably would have impaneled the statewide grand jury in Warwick and gone before them and issued subpoenas for documents and witness testimony. As I've already mentioned, there are some issues with that. The alternative was what we did here. which was to do an investigation and issue a report. And that really relies on voluntary compliance with what we're asking for. And I've encountered this before. For those of you who have followed me with other investigations, that are on, I'm sure that you could identify. I've stood before you and I've issued reports. And I've struggled with, over the course of my term, this tension between the best possible way of getting to the truth and my desire to share with the public what we found, where I don't think a criminal case is either going to develop or won't develop on such a scale that you'll know what it is that we found. It's very hard to do that at the beginning because you don't know what you're going to find as you begin to peel the onion back. So this has been a challenge for us from the very beginning of the administration, when we first looked at an incident involving the Wyatt, going way back to, I believe, 2019, in the fall of 2019, all the way through recent months with some other investigations. And so I would much prefer to use the grand jury, but I really worry that in some instances where I can't explain to the public why we didn't bring a charge, the public won't understand it. This office will lose credibility and lose faith in government. So the advantages of the grand jury, just really quickly, it's compulsory. So if we ask the diocese for records and they don't produce them, they've got to produce them. Go to court, get an order, they got to produce them. If they don't produce them and we find out that they're hiding them from us, we can ask the court to hold them in contempt. It's a really powerful means of getting records. It's also a really powerful way of getting witness testimony. You know, lawyers get records and they want to ask witnesses about what those records mean. And you're going to see this from some of the things we're going to go through here. You know, there are a lot of records here that were not woven together by the diocese. They're individual files about individual priests, and weaving it all together for the team was really difficult. The easiest way to get that done and the quickest way to get that done is to take those records and identify the appropriate witness and sit down in front of them in a grand jury context and ask them about those documents. We didn't have that ability to do that here. And that testimony is under the pains and penalties of perjury. And if you just go back to the Washington Bridge oversight hearings, recall the difference between the first oversight hearings that didn't have an experienced prosecutor asking the questions with respect to my General Assembly colleagues, and the witnesses weren't under oath. With the second set of oversight hearings, where you had an experienced prosecutor asking the questions, and the witnesses were under oath. From where I sat, a big difference, and I think the public came away with at least more answers than they got with the first hearing. That's a good example of experienced prosecutors asking questions while witnesses are under oath is a really effective means of getting to truth and confronting them with documents where the narrative doesn't fit what the record in the document shows. And of course, when somebody refuses, you can immunize them and force them to testify, right? You don't want to immunize potential defendants necessarily, but you can certainly immunize witnesses who may be trying to protect other potential defendants. No opportunity to do that without a grand jury. Now, we've tried to fix that with our grand jury report bill that I put in every year that I've been Attorney General, because I could kind of see these things coming as I began to think about running for office. I hope that this will be yet another example of why we need this statute, why it's not something to be feared. It should only be feared by people who are doing things, candidly, that they probably shouldn't be doing. If we want an Inspector General, we want this statute. If we want a strong APRA, we want this statute. The ability of an Attorney General to write a report like this and have the full powers of the grand jury with due process protections for those named in the report is really critical to getting the best product, and the best product leads to the most truth. Did I go the wrong way? I did. All right. And this, of course, is a disadvantage that I've gone through it. This is a disadvantage of the grand jury. It's just, as it currently exists in Rhode Island, without that report statute, which would allow us to do a report and release it, this is what we end up with, which doesn't satisfy anybody. Okay. These are the current bills. So House Bill 8078, the Senate bill is pending introduction. I hope Mark will champion it. You know, it's time. Excellent. It's more than time to get this passed. It will lead to good and better government. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind. Okay, so the fork in the road. We didn't take the grand jury route for the reasons I've articulated, so we did this instead. This is comparatively weak tea, but this is what we did. We did a memorandum of understanding with the diocese. I signed it with Bishop Tobin back in July of 2019. And under that memorandum of understanding, the diocese produced records. Now, of course, as a result, this report is necessarily limited in large part to the documents that the diocese voluntarily produced. I have no way of knowing here, other than their assertions that they produced everything we asked for. I can't tell the public that, and I can't tell the public that for reasons I've already said. I won't belabor it. But when you choose Fork 2, these are some of the limitations. The diocese withheld documents over which they asserted privilege. The diocese, this is critical, refused to make any diocesan personnel available for interviews. Look, the story's told here. I don't know why they didn't do it. I think they should have. It would have helped us certainly move faster, if nothing else, to the extent they had explanations for what they did or didn't do, or about concepts like internal forum that we'll talk about. They could have answered those questions. Maybe they will now, I don't know. But like anything, when you don't sit down and talk to us, we have to draw conclusions from the records alone, and the records are damning. But that was not helpful. And over the years, the diocese didn't consistently document all complaints, and some records, we believe, were probably destroyed. There were, as I said, some investigative challenges even with the records. This is a letter that Deputy Attorney General D. Goldstein had to send to the diocese. Is just one example. Where we really had to push them to produce what we were asking for. As you can see here, we'd asked them at the time for 32, we had 32 requests outstanding. They'd only answered 2 of them. So, you know, at times it was a challenge to get what we were looking for. Okay. These are the various tenures of the bishops over the course of the investigation. I don't think I need to get into a lot of detail here. Certainly, if you were asking me to characterize where the diocese's worst conduct was, under whose tenure, I would describe that as being under the tenures of Bishops McVinney and Gelano. Certainly, you begin to see change under Bishop Mulvey, Bishop Tobin. Bishops Henning and Lewandowski don't really come into this report at all. But nevertheless, I'm hopeful that now our new bishop will take this report to heart and work with us and work on the diocese's own to make progress. This is a slide I call Heartbreak by the Numbers. You can read it for yourselves. These are the most prevalent age range, 11 to 14-year-old children. I've already mentioned the 75 clergy, the 300 complaints, mostly male victims. You know the rape statute in Rhode Island that was in existence until 1979 did not cover crimes, men against men or men against boys. That was one challenge. So 1979 legally is a real change. The highest number of victims recorded was in the 70s. This number of 26, right in the heart of this heartache by the numbers slide, is 26 years. The average time it took for survivors to report abuse. I mean, I know many of you in the media have spoken to survivors. It's a question worth asking and confirming is what I really mean to say, that, these are things that it takes a long time to reckon with. I was speaking to somebody yesterday who about this, and what they said was, if I were a child, look, I was an altar boy. I rang the bells for Bishop Jeleno at one point at St. Mark Parish in Jamestown, where I was baptized, and my parents were married, and my grandparents were married, and I never faced abuse by any of the priests that were there when I served. But somebody said to me yesterday that if they had gone home and told their parents that a priest had assaulted them, the reaction from their parents would not have been what I suspect would be the reaction today, which is you believe your child instantly and you are on fire. That's much more complicated than that, as the survivors can attest to. The reverence, my dad's 96 and my mom's 90. I love you guys, if you're out there listening. They revered the people in this report. They had some of them in their homes, some of them on seniors and the assistant bishops. And I think for Catholics, particularly of a certain age, this is going to be really hard. Catholics Rhode Island Catholics love their faith and love their religion. And some are very devout, and you find it in all kinds of places, I was talking to somebody doing some work on my home, and, this is a guy who's kind of a rough and tumble. He's a little profane. He's an HVAC guy. He's terrific. I don't want to use his name, but he described him and his wife as devout Catholics. And I've had some friends who aren't crazy about the fact they've even issued this report. This could be hard, but certainly necessary, for certain. We already talked about the 4 priests charged. I want to go back. These are their names. Fathers Petrocelli, Silva, Facette, and Kelly. The diocese list, as I alluded to, had 51 clergy in 2019. They added 4 clergy after we reached out to them and let them know that we thought there were 4 that should be added. We've added more since. So we have 20 more than the diocese 2019 list updated has. These are the priests that we have added. There is a summary for each one of them in the appendices, Appendix A. So if anyone is interested in one of these particular priests or all of them, you will find an individual account of each one, where they were assigned, what they were credibly accused of doing, what the diocese response was to those allegations in the appendices for each one of these priests and all the others. Priests with the greatest reported number of child victims, you see them here. Father O'Connell had 23 reported victims. The numbers are staggering, shocking, astounding. Many victims were altar servers or involved in youth activities. Probably doesn't come as a surprise. As already mentioned, many came from devout families. Explains, perhaps, in part, why sometimes allegations came forward much later in life. Many times, like many, as I've seen in my career as a prosecutor, like many people who prey on children, vulnerable children are identified and sought out by people who abuse children. They see the vulnerability and they exploit it, and we certainly saw that here. Already mentioned delayed disclosure. The average disclosure was 26 years after the abuse. Why the legislation is so important to extend the statute of limitations, Senator and Representative and all of you, because these allegations come late, and that's not unusual, and there is research which explains why that is. The fact that it takes a long time for someone to come forward does not mean that the allegation is not credible. Just the opposite. It's what we can and should expect. And only about 10 to 15% of child sexual abuse is ever reported to authorities, which is why we think that the true scope of this abuse over history was very likely much larger. From the survivors that we spoke to and had contact with, many had behavioral health, and physical difficulties as a result of the abuse, and that continued into life. And some people, from what I've seen, and I don't want to speak for them, and I don't want to identify them because I may be wrong in drawing this assessment, but some of them you meet and they're like, they so clearly are with it and are successful, and you marvel at the strength it takes to be successful in the wake of this horrific abuse. And then others struggle. And that's just the way it is for all kinds of other things that happen in our lives. And so you really have to take survivors and meet survivors, I guess, where they are. But it's hard, and to hear the accounts is really heartbreaking. This scandal impacted nearly every community in Rhode Island. You'll see a map in a minute. The other major trend, as I mentioned, is the diocese protected accused priests, transfers, treatment, and promises of confidentiality. And they failed for decades to make adequate referrals to law enforcement. And you can see here that it impacted nearly every community in Rhode Island. Why Cranston and Providence are where most of the abuse took place, I don't know. Large number of parishes there, I suspect, but I'll let the statisticians out there spend some more time with that. As I said, these are just some graphs that show the number of transfers, the number of times people were sent to treatment, and beyond. Well, one thing that's really striking is how many times some of these priests were transferred. I mean, again, go to the appendices, but sometimes some of these priests were transferred. I think from the numbers, you'll have to look at them because I can't quite see them without my distance glasses. I'm kind of using two things here, but I believe there are 31 priests that were transferred at least 5 times. Am I right about that, guys, or is that completely wrong?
I think that's
the other way around? It's a previous slide, but am I right about the statistic?
I think that's right.
Yeah. So
Here we go.
is this the one here? Yeah. So 31 priests were transferred at least 5 times. Some were transferred more than that, but think about that for a minute. 31 priests transferred 5 times, which means accused, handed off, handed off, handed off, handed off, without telling anybody in the wake or in front. Think about what the danger that exposed children to. It's really remarkable. And then you see here, over time, there's some good news here that the referrals to law enforcement have certainly increased since around 2000. Much fewer referrals back in the previous decades. I would describe the diocese handling of those complaints to have much improved in recent years under Kevin O'Brien than under his predecessor, frankly. I think Kevin O'Brien, who came from the state police, like Lieutenant Colonel Kramer, now at the diocese, coming from the state police, in tribute to my state police colleagues, brought and will bring a level of professionalism that gives me much more assurance that these complaints will be referred in a timely way and be handled with the right level of respect for victims that was not always there. But again, there are some things that we think they can still improve, and we'll get to those. And then this I think is one of the most damning conclusions in the report. It's a quote from the report on page 90. The diocese's historical failure to timely and appropriately respond to clergy abuse complaints resulted in the sexual abuse of additional Rhode Island children. It may seem obvious, but I think that captures it in a nutshell, which I guess is why these guys wrote it and why we have it here. I mean, it really does sum up the problem, which is so much hurt and harm could have been avoided had the diocese removed these priests from the diocese immediately upon any allegation against them. Really nothing explains it. Nothing justifies it for certain. Nothing explains it. But when it comes to the people who work for you, there are certain things that you can't make compromises about. I mean, it sounds obvious. But the diocese made compromises when it came to keeping personnel who would abuse children. There's just no understating how awful that is. All right, we're going to cover now the period from 1950 to 2000. Really here, we're going to go through a couple of examples that will show what we've already talked about. We've talked about the driving force was to avoid scandal and transfers, treatment, sabbaticals, etc. Bishops favored in-house responses. They promised confidentiality to pedophile priests who self-reported. They invoked religious rules and other doctrines. This doctrine, for example, of internal form. So internal form, you know, our staff here might understand this a little bit better than I do, but this seems to be a doctrine which allows a bishop to hold something in confidentiality, notwithstanding that it is something that should be reported to civil authorities, including the abuse of children. And it's broader than confession. It's been used in the past as a channel for priests to confidentially discuss abuse allegations with the bishop. And today, it is still exempt from the diocese's written policy on cooperation with civil authorities. And you can see that in the highlighted language. You know, so this doctrine of internal form still exists. Remember I mentioned earlier, if the diocese had sat down with us, we would have asked them about this document. What does it mean? Are you still using it? If you are, why? If you aren't, wouldn't it serve you better to take it out of your policy? So there's a pretty simple example of how sitting down with us would have helped our investigation, maybe advanced the ball, maybe cleared up something for which the diocese shouldn't take criticism for. But there's only one thing I can conclude when we get a document like this, and it's still in the policy, is that they continue to hold a way out of reporting to civil authorities abusive priests. We talked about the shuffling. I don't think I need to belabor it. Oh, here's the number. If I just waited a couple of slides, it would have been right in front of me. 31 were transferred 5 to 9 times. I did go over the slide presentation a few times, but there's a lot of slides here. Example, Father Joseph McCraw from 1951 to 1964. It really wanted to start at the beginning here. It's a good example of how transfer was the approach. So there are multiple complaints of sexual abuse against Father McCraw at Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Providence in 1951 and 1952. What's the response? We'll transfer him to St. Joseph's Church in Woonsocket. In 1953, Bishop McVinney gets a letter from the pastor at St. Joseph's seeking McCraw's removal. And what you see in the documents are these euphemisms or this coded language all the time. Here is a good example. He does not seem at present in a condition to exercise a fruitful ministry. Well, there's an understatement. The response is to transfer him to Our Lady of Consolation Church in Pawtucket. Okay. All right, so when he's transferred to Our Lady of Consolation in 53, this will be his second transfer, you'll understand by this appointment that is no vindication of your erratic and intolerable conduct. So let's not pretend that Bishop McVinney didn't know exactly what he was dealing with. If I receive any more complaints about your conduct, I shall be forced to remove you from the rolls. Bishops knew and did nothing. Worse than nothing, they transferred priests. But it continues. In 1955 to 1956, while McCraw's still assigned to Our Lady of Consolation, 2 boys reported in sworn affidavits that he served them alcohol before attempting to abuse them at his summer home. The response from the diocese, a 4-month suspension, followed by transfer to a home for convalescents in Newport. In 1957, he requests a new assignment, having done penance and atonement for 2 years. The response? Transfer to the Brothers of the Sacred Heart in Burrillville. Remember Burrillville? Remember that? If you go back and look at that map we showed you, we noticed it when we were going through the slides show last night together, the team and I. There's a lot of reported cases from Burrillville. And McCraw may well be responsible for that. I can't tell you, but here's part of the problem. By March 61, McCraw is suspended yet again. He's moved to a priest home in Montreal. He admits at this now to McVinney moral touches, but pleaded for removal of his suspension. The response? In September of 61, he's sent to St. Anne's Church in Woonsocket as an assistant pastor. He remained there in active ministry until 1964. The diocese didn't include Father McCraw on its list of credibly abused clergy until we reached out to them and suggested that perhaps he would be a worthy addition. This is the 50s, right? And I'm sure a lot of people in this room, including me, weren't alive in the 50s. But this is an example of how far back it went. And as we're going to see, it's just one example. Go through those appendices and look at the allegations against these priests. And look at how many times they were transferred. And think about the parishioners who walked into those churches with a priest having been transferred from A to B, not knowing a thing about why Father X showed up at the lectern that weekend. The diocese didn't tell him. They didn't tell him anything about the guy's risk to children. He just showed up. And that went on for decades. I want to give a shout out to Sean here because Sean Malloy, who worked on this case from the beginning. Sean, can you, so they know who you are, yeah, thank you. Sean is the one who spotted a handwritten reference to McCraw having been accused in 1951 and began to peel away the onion that got us to where we needed to be. And we didn't even have McCraw's files until Sean began to pull at that string. And Sean and Adi are the two up here that have been working on this from the very beginning. And I promised Sean that he was in the civil division when this started. He's now in our appellate unit. And I told him at the time, remember Sean, that he wanted to go to appellate, and I told him, well, we need you to finish the diocese report. And I told Sean, well, I promise, I can't give you that current opening, but I promise I'll move you. And I kept my promise, I moved him, but I don't think we knew it was going to take 6 years either, Sean. So I know you, like all of us, are glad that this day has finally come. As horrible as it is in so many ways. Okay, so the pre-shuffling continues under Bishop Jeleno. So Father Roland Lapierre was accused of sexually abusing at least 6 boys between the ages of 8 and 14 from 1975 to 1980. So while he's assigned to St. Aloysius Church in Woonsocket, he reportedly puts his hands down young boys' pants. The boy immediately told his mother, God bless him, and accompanied her to Woonsocket Police Department to report the allegations. Bishop Jeleno transferred Lapierre to St. Mary's Church in Cranston on an understanding that no charges would be filed and Lapierre would receive quote-unquote therapy. Just over a year later, in May of 1980, Bishop Jeleno removed Lapierre from St. Mary's. He described this was a memorandum to Bishop Angel and the Personnel Board that based on professional advice, this priest had depression bordering on illness. Those euphemistic words that we see throughout the documents. Lapierre himself later admitted the real reason for his removal from St. Mary's was he sexually abused 4 12-year-old boys. He approached the bishop and admitted his wrongdoing, and the bishop removed him from the parish. But in September of 1980, Bishop Jeleno again returned Lapierre to the ministry, assigning him to St. Matthew's Parish in Central Falls. There, Lapierre reportedly sexually abused 2 more children, 2 more boys. Father Norman Demers. And again, these are examples. I'm just going to take too long to begin with, but these are just some examples. Okay, go through the appendices. You're going to see the same thing over and over again. Father Norman Demers, 1985. Letters to Bishop Jeleno, a religious sister, cited concerns about Demers having inappropriate material in the rectory. He had nude photographs of males, and there were 9 young men living in the rectory under his care. Bishop Jeleno asked the sister not to report the information because of the scandal that it could cause, particularly given the recent arrests of other diocesan priests for sexually assaulting minors. Now here, I want to give a shout out to former Attorney General Arlene Violet for 2 reasons. Number one, when I think of a sister going to war, as we're going to see, for children, I think of Arlene Violet, number one. Number two, Arlene Violet, when she was Attorney General, brought, I believe, the first criminal charges against priests, a number of them, I believe as many as 4. And I just saw Attorney General Violet yesterday, and I thanked her then, and I'm thanking her publicly now. She was not, just to be clear, she was not the sister, to my knowledge, at least in the records that we're sharing with you now. So these are, again, we try to use the records, rather than characterize the records, we're trying to give you the first-hand information. So this is from the document from Bishop Jeleno to the religious sister. I would therefore hope that you would not go to the public media. This would certainly be very harmful to us. It is my commitment now, this is below, that by bringing it to my attention, you have fulfilled your responsibilities. So what's the bishop doing here, respectfully? He's telling the sister, I got it. Yeah. I got it. Well, this is why I think of Attorney General Violet, because if she's not the sister, and I know that she's not, at least I think she's not, she certainly had Arlene Violet's spirit, because she wrote back to Bishop Jeleno, and she gratefully acknowledged his letter, and stated, and said that you stated that you have fulfilled your responsibility, and I would ask you to leave the rest in my hands. This is great. On the contrary, my responsibility is not fulfilled until such time as you have taken action to meet the many spiritual needs of the parish. Assurances are not enough. To do nothing is to permit situations to continue. And if only the diocese, over this course of history, had taken the approach of that religious sister, we likely wouldn't be here today. And many, many, many children would have been spared this horrific abuse. Nevertheless, Father Demers remained in ministry until his 2002 suspension, accused of abusing at least 11 boys and young men, including several after this 1986 episode. We talked a little bit about spiritual retreats and sabbaticals. This was the notion that you could fix a priest who was abusing children by sending them out for treatment or counseling, and then when they came back, they would be perfectly fine. B. Samuel Torillo, Father B. Samuel Torillo is a good example. There are records from the diocese back in the 50s that the diocese learned of, but withheld from local authorities, abuse allegations against him from 52 and 53. Bishop McVinney, sent him to a monastery in Massachusetts for 2 weeks of penance and spiritual exercises, after which he was returned to full-time ministry and reportedly sexually assaulted another young boy between 56 and 58 at Holy Angels Church in Barrington. So the 2 weeks obviously didn't work, and the notion that it would is at best head-scratching, even though it was in the 50s. It continued, of course, into the 70s. Father Alfred DeRosiers, in March of 93, actually the abuse happened in the 70s. There was an allegation against this priest that he had repeatedly sexually abused a woman when she was a 15-year-old girl 2 decades earlier. Bishop Jeleno met with Father DeRosiers, who admitted to having, having an affair with a 15-year-old child. In response, Bishop Jeleno arranged for a sabbatical at Boston College. I'm sad to say, my alma mater. And Bishop Gelano, notwithstanding that this priest had admitted to having an affair with a 15-year-old girl, he nonetheless vouched for his admission to the program and said he was in good standing. As you'll see in the report, Boston College, when they learned of the truth, took a very dim view of what the bishop had done. The diocese sent at least 21 clergy with documented allegations of child abuse to treatment centers for evaluation and treatment. Many were returned to service, and several were accused of abusing additional children after they were put back in the ministry. There's another example, Father Robert Marcantonio. In 1970, following accusations he had abused 10 to 15 different boys, he left St. Mary's Church in Cranston and fled to Iowa. When I read those words, I'm trying to imagine what fleeing to Iowa under those circumstances looks like. But he was receiving treatment from a psychiatrist who was also a priest. Instead of contacting authorities or seeking Marcantonio's removal, Bishop McVinney expressed his support for Marcantonio to his therapist. I would hope that you could be of some help to him. However, he'd already been seen in the diocese, and both of those experts had expressed a judgment that he is, quote unquote, incurable. In 1971, only 10 months after the treatment began, Marcantonio was deemed effectively cured, and Bishop McVinney was notified of the same. And when Bishop Gelano succeeded Bishop McVinney, Father Marcantonio, who remained in Iowa, wrote to Bishop Gelano to explain his situation, trying to assure Bishop Gelano that his therapy, as we see there, was deemed successful. Bishop Gelano permitted Father Marcantonio to remain in Iowa, to remain his doctorate in psychology, and in 1975 invited him to return to the diocese, as you see here, asking him to serve as a weekend assistant at St. John's Church in Cumberland. Father Marcantonio would later be accused of sexually abusing 3 boys in Iowa, several more upon his return to Rhode Island. So again, those are examples. I refer you to the report for many, 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 many more. All right, Chapter 6, the diocese's past failures to refer child abuse complaints to law enforcement. Okay. So, going through the records, we could not find a documented referral to civil authorities, meaning law enforcement, until 1989. Until 1989, nearly 40 years into our review period, was the first documented referral to law enforcement, notwithstanding what we have seen from some of the examples going on now for nearly 40 years. This obviously prevented clergy from being criminally charged in real time over that period of time. Rather, the bishops allowed these priests to remain in the ministry with little to no oversight and access to more children. And we'll come back to the lack of oversight in a little bit. This is the evolution of referrals to law enforcement. So you can see that there are very few from 1950, and we'll see in the graph on the next slide, to 1990. And then things begin to pick up in the 90s. There's a letter, I think a watershed moment, again, to give a shout out to one of my predecessors, is when Attorney General Peter Neronha signed a letter of understanding between the diocese and this office, where they would immediately refer allegations of clergy abuse to law enforcement. One of the things, we've seen a little bit of this in the context of allegations against teachers in recent years, where the first instinct is to internally investigate rather than refer it to law enforcement in the first instance, and that's always a mistake. Law enforcement should be involved right from the beginning so that we can begin to build the strongest possible case right away. Okay. So things have greatly improved. So you see here the reporting by decade. Reported abuse by decade, it's gone down significantly. Again, one of the things, there's a tail here, so we won't know whether these numbers will hold, I think, for additional decades, based on the average that we found, 26 years to come forward. So there's some abuse from the 90s and the 80s that, if I'm doing my math right, that still may come forward, the 2000s, early 2000s and beyond. We'll see. But certainly referrals to law enforcement have gone up dramatically, and that's to the diocese's credit. There was inconsistent reporting into the 2010s. Between 2000 and 2010, we found that the diocese still referred only half of the complaints it received to law enforcement. So, again, to the extent that the diocese would paint this report as rehashing old news, I don't view that as old news. I mean, that's within this century, and up until 2010, just 15 years ago, we were still only getting half of the number of complaints that the diocese was getting, meaning we being in law enforcement. Most reporting was entirely voluntary and subject to the diocese's own shifting thresholds of what warranted law enforcement contact. These continued problems and the need for solutions are identified or illustrated by the 2011 handling of the case of Deacon Lawrence Gagnon. He was accused in 2011 of pulling down the pants of several sixth grade boys at St. Joseph's School in West Warwick. The then Director of Compliance, Robert McCarthy, dismissed the case as merely poor judgment, not criminal or worthy of reporting to law enforcement under a mandated reporting law. Days later, again, someone stepped forward, not from the diocese. Well, perhaps if the principal was employed by the diocese, was the principal employed by the diocese, guys? Do you know in this particular instance?
It would have been employed by the local school.
Local school. So this was not the diocese. The local school stepped forward and expressed to Director McCarthy his view that the allegation should be reported to authorities. All right. So subsequent investigation by West Warwick revealed that this was far more than poor judgment. Several boys told the police that Gagnon had repeatedly touched their groins. He later confessed to police that he had fondled several boys' genitals. He was charged and subsequently pled nolo. But this is what prompted the agreement between this office under Attorney General Kilmartin and the diocese. Certainly, I wasn't in the office at the time, but drawing what I think are logical conclusions, the office was justifiably outraged by the initial response, was grateful to the principal for coming forward and allowing the office to make a case, and made it clear to the diocese that something had to change, and it did. And that was signed by Attorney General Kilmartin and Bishop Tobin. All right, so we're going to go through this fairly quickly here. The diocese reforms and responses to clergy abuse, 1990 to the present. These are what we would describe as early attempts at reform, and I think the key word here is attempts. They did not prove to be particularly strong in our opinion, and we'll go through a little bit of that. So Bishop Jeleno promulgated the first policy and procedures concerning reports of sexual misconduct in 1990. There was an advisory review committee that was formed, although it didn't meet very often, as we'll see in a moment. He established the Office of Education and Compliance, although Director McCarthy is deceased. So I want to be respectful in my remarks, but I would say that we have come a long way in that position, as I already alluded to, with the hiring of state police veterans for that position. These are the policies and procedures that Bishop Jeleno began, but one of the weaknesses was it didn't apply to physical touching of non-intimate body parts or non-physical sexual misconduct, including grooming behaviors, which we'll come back to, and it was required strictly internal reporting. It neither required nor encouraged referral of complaints to civil authorities. So you can see the weakness there. I already mentioned this review committee, which didn't meet. From what we could find from the records, only twice. Again, we didn't have the ability to sit down with any members of the diocese. I don't know that any of them were still around who would have been able to tell us whether this committee was more effective than it appeared to be from the records, but it didn't really appear to us to have much of an impact. And then the Office of Education and Compliance. This is the internal investigative arm of the diocese. From what we've been able to establish from the records, we believe that from the beginning there's been a lack of clear written guidelines excuse me, for investigations and an absence of meaningful oversight. So, I've been an investigator, prosecutor for a long time. I've overseen offices for a long time. You need multiple layers of supervision to ensure that you're getting to the right place. Leaving it in the hands of one person alone is not the pathway to success. There were these national responses in the 2000s, the Dallas Charter, in 2002, and later the Essential Norms in 2002, where the National Council of Bishops were starting to put in place requirements that dioceses take on this scandal horror of clergy child sexual abuse. The diocese established the Diocesan Review Board. They established an Office of Outreach and Prevention, which was designed to support victims. In our view at the time, did not go nearly far enough. Still much more to do in that area. And the diocese promulgated its policy, its first version of the Child Protection and Outreach Policy, which required a code of ethics trainings and background checks in 2004. But as this slide indicates, significant concerns remain. The Dallas Charter and the Essential Norms really leave it to each diocese to protect children. And what we've seen is that some dioceses have responded to reports in ways that are incredibly meaningful, and some have not, because they do have that discretion to do it. Chapter 8, concerns with the diocese's modern responses to the clergy abuse crisis. So these are concerns that we have now, today. Again, we still believe that that at least at the beginning of this time period of 2000 forward, there continue to be inconsistent and inadequate investigations. Again, improved for sure, but still room for improvement. There has been a failure to document review board determinations. This review board, which oversees or is supposed to oversee, among other things, investigations into clergy sexual abuse, made a decision early on not to document their meetings. And of course, so that has prevented us from determining how effective they are in overseeing the actual investigators on the ground. Another example where today, having the ability to speak to a bishop about what this review board does, the degree of oversight it engages in would have potentially been helpful to the diocese. But we're not able to conclude the extent to which it is actually providing in-depth supervision, which we view as important. The diocese is still making limited referrals to the Vatican, as we'll see in a moment, to have priests removed from the ministry, especially under Bishop Tobin. We don't believe there is adequate monitoring of credibly abused priests, and we do believe that there is a continued lack of transparency and accountability. We also believe that there's a failure to identify and appropriately respond to grooming behavior, meaning behavior by priests that ought to cause a red flag. The report documents one such incident in recent years, very recent years, where in the confessional a priest was asking children about their sexual activity. Certainly, from where we sit, a red flag should have been to the diocese. It was only after pressure from the media, from parishioners, and I'm not sure from this office, I suspect from this office. We certainly pressured them in a lot of ways. I can't keep them all top of mind. Did we pressure them on this point, friends? Yes, we did. I thought we did. Did they take steps? But we still think this is kind of a big hole or a big blind spot in how the diocese approaches this risk of potentially ongoing child sexual abuse. The diocese still does not investigate third-party and anonymous, or at least consistently, third-party and anonymous reports of abuse. And this is much worse, going back farther, but if it came from a third party, well, we don't need to investigate it. If it's anonymous, we don't need to investigate it. That runs counter to, if you talk to the state police, I think Heather would not, if you get an anonymous complaint, it's about a serious crime, you're going to do everything you can to run that to ground. Diocese didn't always do that. And they also have not, and to date, we believe, consistently still don't investigate allegations against deceased priests, which we believe they should, Certainly there's no criminal case there, but survivors deserve the justice that that investigation will bring. There's a continued request of victims to take polygraphs, which we believe re-victimizes victims and is not useful to determining whether or not an investigation should move forward. There's still, in some ways, a lack of clear written investigatory guidelines. Timeframes are not clear. Victims often wait many, many times. There's a little bit of irony in that, since you've been waiting for this report for a long time from us. But we believe that when it comes to individual priests, these investigations should move a lot faster than what it took us to compile 75 years of history. And there continues to be, in our view, because we can't confirm otherwise, a lack of clear oversight by the review board. We'll just give a couple of examples here. Dennis LaPrade is with us today. I've already mentioned him. I'm really grateful to him for being here and for what the account you're about to hear. In 2014, Dennis reported to the diocese that Father Francis Santilli, had sexually abused him in the early 1980s when he was an altar boy at a parish in Providence. He also identified by name 2 brothers who he suspected may have also been abused by Father Santilli. There's no indication from the records that we received that the diocese attempted to contact those individuals, and Bishop Tobin permitted Santilli to remain in the ministry. Nearly 8 years later, in 2021, a third party contacted both the diocese and law enforcement to identify the same 2 brothers as victims of Santilli. Resulted in a criminal investigation, Santilli's suspension, removal, and referral to the Vatican, and the diocese naming Santilli on its credibly accused list. There's a failure in the first instance of the diocese doing the kind of adequate investigation that Dennis deserved and victims deserve. We've already talked about the failings of the review board, so I won't belabor it here. We did ask to interview members of the board, as I mentioned, and again, we were denied access to them. The diocese has made limited referrals to the Vatican. The Dallas Charter and the essential norms, which are supposed to be the goalposts by which the diocese respond to these allegations, require permanent removal and possible dismissal from the priesthood for even a single act, quote unquote, of sexual abuse, following appropriate process in accord with canon law. The general rule is that bishops refer to the Vatican all complaints containing any semblance of truth. The Diocese of Providence appears to have referred to the Vatican far fewer complaints than zero tolerance contemplates. Since 2002, only 9 of 21 priests, which we have deemed should have been eligible for referral to the Vatican, were in fact referred. So this is why we say this is not a historical problem for lots of reasons. This is another. Among the limited cases referred to the Vatican, Bishop Tobin repeatedly sought leniency for credibly accused priests, recommending against their removal, and instead suggesting a life of prayer and penance. For each of Fathers Timothy Gordon, Barry Meehan in 2013, Gordon was in 2012, John Allard in 2013, and Samuel Torillo just 10 years ago, Bishop Tobin told the Vatican, "I do not believe," quote, same language each time, "I do not believe Father to be a danger to young people." And here they all are for each priest. It's the same language. At this time, I do not believe Father Gordon to be a danger. I don't believe Father Meehan to be a danger to young people. I like to think it's not cut and paste, but well, I'll let the words speak for themselves. Bishop Tobin likewise advocated for Father Francis Santilli when referring his case to the Vatican in 2002. Why do you have this document? Because these words are not reconcilable. In the first instance, Bishop Tobin tells the Vatican, the accusations regarding Father Santilli's behavior are repugnant, given the nature of the actions and the age of the victims. Further down, nevertheless, Father Francis Santilli also exercised his priesthood for over 40 years in an exemplary fashion and without scandal. If anybody out there, whether you're sitting in this room or out in the public, can reconcile those two phrases, okay, in 2022, you tell me. You tell me. And don't tell me that this is history and stuff we already know, because it's not. It makes you angry, honestly. You read the words, and we were reading them together last night, and as we went through the slide deck, and you don't, it's hard to read for obvious reasons, but as prosecutors, we've done a lot of cases like this. 10 of our lawyers do crimes against children cases here, more than any other group. And you build up the calluses to this. And you read this behavior by priests, and it is so at odds with what you were taught to think about them. And then you get to this, and you get to this language. And I just don't know how you square an exemplary priesthood with molesting children. I just don't know how you square it. I would have liked to have asked Bishop Tobin that question. If he's got an answer, he's free to send it in. To date, it appears that the Diocese of Providence lacks any formal or informal policy or practice of monitoring known, living, or credibly abused clergy. There are priests out there that are credibly accused abusers, and we don't know the extent to which the diocese knows where they are, keeps an eye on them. Remember, that's their employer. They're responsible for them, by their own words, by their own policies. We don't know the extent to which they monitor them, make sure that people near them are safe. We don't know those answers today, and we should know them. And if I had an opportunity to sit down with the diocese and ask questions, I would have asked them that question. But again, we didn't have that opportunity. As recently as 2013, they admitted they had no set program in place to monitor ex-priests who admit to molestation. That's their words. John Allard in 2013, another example, he admitted during an interview he'd repeatedly sexually abused a 15-year-old boy. In 2013, the Vatican imposed a life of prayer and penance while cautioning Bishop Tobin that further canonical and pastoral vigilance is left to the discretion of Your Excellency, including monitoring. There's no indication of any steps taken on Bishop Tobin's watch, and perhaps afterwards. Allard returned to part-time kitchen work at his last parish assignment around 2014, seemingly, according to what we could learn, without the diocese even knowing that he was there. And we've already talked about the diocese credibly accused list needs to be updated. In our view, it needs to add 20 priests and needs to, for the priests already there, add additional information that is missing. You can see it there on the screen. All right, recommendations to the diocese. Following the 2002 mass settlement, the diocese implemented 2 survivor compensation programs. Bishop Tobin and the review board terminated them in 2007 on the grounds that they were time limited and intended only to clear the decks of follow-up litigation after the 2002 settlement. Obviously, survivors have continued to come forward. To me, that's an indication that the diocese is more concerned about money than they are about compensating victims. I think that needs to change, as it has in other dioceses around the country. We recommend that the diocese establish a new independent financial compensation program for survivors. They may say, well, who's the Attorney General to suggest this? So anticipating that, all we're asking is that they model it after programs already adopted by other prominent dioceses and archdioceses during the last decade. 2016, the Diocese of New York, the Archdiocese of Philadelphia in 2018, 6 California dioceses in 2019, and I think there are recent examples just from the last few months because I've read about them in news reports. There's still no policy or practice in place for monitoring priests. We already alluded to that. They should change that. We believe that there should be somebody hired by the diocese to put together a safety plan for each one of these priests. It should be subject to review. We believe that there should be preventative measures put in place, including background checks, strong investigations of potential grooming behaviors, not dismiss them, and other preventative measures. We believe that for internal investigations, the guidelines need to be updated, and they should really be designed now to investigate everything. No matter how thin a reed of evidence walks through the door in the first instance, no matter how old the allegation, no matter whether the priest or bishop is living or dead, we believe that the diocese should investigate because survivors deserve justice. All right, we also believe that the polygraph should be banned. I've already alluded to this. The list of accused priests should be added to. We believe that there should be a new letter of understanding between this office and the diocese to facilitate continued oversight. In response to our report, they should continue referring all complaints. The scope of reportable allegations should be expanded. The amount of information provided to this office should be expanded, and diocesan personnel should be made available to us, at least for some period of time, so that we can assure ourselves on behalf of the public, as the people's lawyer, that the diocese is doing things the right way. Today, legislative recommendations. This will be quick. We already talked about the grand jury reporting statute. I can't emphasize that any more than I already have. We want to expand the statute of limitations for second-degree sexual assault from 3 to 10 years. That's been in the General Assembly for a couple of years now. Still haven't gotten that over the hump yet. We want to revive civil claims against institutional defendants. That's Carol's bill and Mark's bill. And we want to amend the mandatory reporting statute to explicitly include priests as abuse involving priests to be a part of the mandatory reporting statute. These are all more specifics on those various things. I've been speaking for almost 2 hours. You're tired of me by now. I, however, am not tired of you, so if you have any questions after all that, I'm happy to take.
Yeah, General, the diocese put out a lengthy statement just as this was getting going. You've already addressed some of it.
Yep.
You say this is all historical, looking in the past, all that. But I do want you to respond to one specific thing. One of the things they point out is the 4 priests your office brought criminally charged were not as a result of your investigation for this report, but because they reported them to you, and that shows that the diocese has turned a page. First of all, do they have that right?
Yeah.
And if so, is that evidence that they have turned a page?
Yeah, look, I think the very nature of that question shows that the diocese isn't yet ready to own what they've done here. They can go through this report and pull out things that they take credit for, and we've tried to give them credit where they deserve it. I can't tell you as I sit here, Tim, whether they handed us a case fully made. Steve, did that happen?
It did not.
Thanks. So, if he tells me it didn't happen, then it didn't happen. That's all I need to know. We can follow up on that with details. They want to go through a 274-page report and give themselves a pat on the back, go ahead. But the notion that this is history, the notion that they own it, the notion that they care about victims is belied by that very statement. And until the diocese gets it, it's all the more reason why this legislation has to pass, because it's pretty clear that they're not going to recognize survivors on their own. They're going to be pulled, kicking and screaming, into owning it. So bring on, out of 275 pages of narrative and 275 pages of history and appendices about priests, okay? I would love to them to go find Bishop Tobin. Certainly they can talk to him and have them, through him, square how allegations of child sexual abuse can be repugnant and at the same time the priest had an exemplary career. Square those words. That's my message to the diocese. Start there. Yes, Catherine?
I've got 3 questions, and one starts with the same
Okay.
statement. that
Don't assume I'm going to remember them all, so let's take them serious.
One at a time.
Yes.
I'm just begging for some
Yes.
time here. The other thing they say is, the report does not have the force of law, but rather offers untested perspectives in boldface of the Attorney General, the bulk of which focus on historical cases of abuse in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, look, I think I've sort of responded to it preemptively by going through the report and the level of detail that I have. And again, the diocese, for whatever reason, unlike other dioceses around the country, here, I hope it's not in the Rhode Island water, because I am a native, as you know, they just can't seem to accept responsibility for what they have done and make it right. Whether it's historical or not, they have an obligation to make it right. Think of slavery, for example. Think of the Rhode Island families that were responsible for slavery. Some of those families have tried to make it right in recent years. The Episcopal Diocese, by comparison, many Episcopalians were involved in the slave trade. The Diocese of Rhode Island, under Bishop Nicely, has tried to make amends and accepted responsibility for their role in the slave trade. Okay? I'm not trying to compare apples and oranges here, yet I think the principle is the same. This is the diocese and its forebears, and it's not all decades ago, as we've seen. They need to own it, they need to fix it, they need to accept responsibility, they need to apologize. And I don't hear that in their words. They resisted us. We had to push back to get the documents. They didn't make their witnesses available to us. That's not owning it. I believe we've been fair in this report. We used their documents. It's why we used the documents themselves. I feel really comfortable about what we've done here. One thing that these reports, as I've learned, they don't make people happy. Which is why people don't want us to do them, right? People don't want us to do reports about ILO. They don't want us to do reports about the diocese. They don't want us to do these reports because they expose to the public our view of what happened. If you want to write your own report, go write it. Rebut us in writing. I'll await it, or my successor will. Next question, Kathy. I only have 3.
Okay. This is the short one, I think, 2 or 3. You mentioned that the diocese withheld documents they deemed privileged. What in all of these documents did they label privileged?
Kathy, I don't know. Did they give us a privilege log? They did. So the way this typically works is, in litigation of this, or potential litigation of this scope, is first of all, you number all your documents, you can go ahead and find them. But you, called Bates numbering, but you also produce a privilege log. And, look, there's really, in this context, without a grand jury, there's no court forum to really fight that battle out. But the documents that we did receive tell the story. And so I'm comfortable that the story has been told. Could we have exposed potentially more things, more priests, more diocesan response? Maybe. But the report's long and it's detailed, and I think it tells the story here, the essential story.
Third question. When Representative McEntee's bill passed the House last year, when it's come up in past years, and contained a revival window for cases that are currently time barred, the Senate has consistently expressed concern about the legislation being illegal, unconstitutional, and they've seized on a few decisions, perhaps in other states, maybe Maine. Catherine Braub would know that better than I.
Okay.
And I guess my question for you is, what is your response to the Senate that has not wanted to touch this legislation because they believe it's unconstitutional?
Well, that's not the view we've taken, and we've supported it consistently and told the Senate that. They'll have to make their decision this time around whether or not they're going to take that legislation up. I have tremendous respect for the Senate, tremendous respect for them, leadership, and we'll see where this takes us this year. I'm hopeful, but it will be up to the champions of the bill in the Senate to get it over the finish line. But we're prepared to defend the bill if it's unconstitutional. Yeah, look, if you think about it, certain dioceses are not relying on legislation to make compensation to victims. I referred to 3 of them. There are more. And we'll track down the one that just did it recently. New Jersey comes to mind, but it may not be New Jersey. But the diocese could do this voluntarily. We're opening up this window because the diocese won't. So the diocese could do the right thing. It doesn't have to be forced to do it. But like so many things that we've seen over, it's why, have things changed? Yes. But in some ways, things haven't changed, if you know what I mean. Like taking responsibility, that hasn't really changed in some ways, based on what I'm hearing from the diocese response, and I've heard before, in our experience in the investigation. I know somebody in the back over there on the left had a question. Yes?
Yes. High up in the report, it's stressed that Rhode Island is unique just because of its strong, high per capita Catholic population
Yes.
here. Can you talk a little bit about how that might have impacted people coming forward? Did you find that was more helpful, or did that was like, are people maybe a little bit more shy just because of the strong Catholic population in such a small state? And how do you think this report's going to land in Rhode Island?
Well, it's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to go home and talk to mom and dad tonight and see what their reaction was, if they were able to listen today. I don't know. But when we go into this, it didn't impact the investigation. So we had no difficulty in terms of speaking to survivors and being able, the smart team here, it's really good group of lawyers here, able to figure this out, put it together for you. So there were no challenges to the investigation because we are an overwhelmingly Catholic state. Where it'll land, I don't know. I don't know. I think that, I don't know. I can only say that I'm proud of the product. I'm proud of the work. The team did a great job here. And I'm really proud of them and the work that they did, and the state police. Really proud of what they did.
General, do you believe that the diocese is still getting credible reports? Are they turning those over?
I believe to the extent it's happening where we would get them. We haven't gotten any in recent memory, but I have no doubt that we would get them. I think that's a function of the state police, meaning Kevin O'Brien and now Bob Kramer. I mean, they get it. So we would get those complaints now.
You reference some recommendations for them, but would or should the message to the public be like, if you have an allegation, go to law enforcement and not to the diocese?
Of course, yes. Yeah, I think, Brian, one of the questions is always come to us, and there's a hotline on the last slide if I go to it. Actually, it's there. Good, thanks. So the public is welcome to call us, right? So for historical things, but they should call us about everything, current and historical. But it's unlikely, unless we update our report, that we would, which we could and might, that we in the first instance would do the investigation. We could, but we think the diocese should do it.
And so the 20 that you added to the list, did that just come from their own documents, or was that in speaking to survivors and getting more?
For the most part, from their own documents, including this Father McCraw that Sean spotted in a note in another file that prompted us to ask, well, give us Father McCraw's files, because we didn't ask for every priest. We asked for records that pertain to allegations of abuse, right? A lot of records down there. I believe they're mostly in Cranston, aren't they? Is that where that record center is?
Mostly in the cloud.
Oh, in the cloud now? Well, our records are now in the cloud, yes. Yes, for certain. Other questions? Yes.
Two questions.
One, go ahead. Can I take this young lady here first?
To your point about the diocese being
Yep.
reluctant to offer financial compensation,
Yeah.
is it your opinion that they're more worried about the money or about having millions of dollars put out there earmarked towards victims that would change their reputation?
I don't know, but I think the reputation is what it is. I mean, this it's it's kind of hard to read this and not come away with the story. So the reputation now is what the reputation is, and it's not hard to do the right thing. And I think they should just do the right thing. They have an opportunity, right? It's a new bishop. I haven't met the bishop yet. I hope I'll have that opportunity. I've told people in other industry this. As a lawyer, at some point you have to stop listening to the lawyers. The lawyers are always going to tell you, be careful, don't admit anything, don't take responsibility. Lawyers are by definition risk averse. But when you're leading something, sometimes you have to say, stop lawyering. And it's a different decision tree. And I've come to recognize that here, and I've in healthcare, for example, where the lawyers are kind of driving, and you can feel it. The lawyers are or frankly, in the Brown shooting, the lawyers are not my lawyers. Other lawyers are driving responses. No, that's not what's needed in the moment. What's needed in the moment is not the lawyers, and that's coming from the lawyers, Tim. That's coming from the lawyers. That's not coming from this bishop, from what I can tell. This bishop, respectfully, has an opportunity here. And I, as a Rhode Islander, I hope, even though I'm not a Catholic any longer, I hope that he takes it.
You've suggested that there's something healthy for society about getting the whole story out thoroughly, comprehensively, clearly.
Yeah.
A couple of questions. Your colleague in Massachusetts has done a similar report. Would you encourage, but they've not made it public. Would you encourage them to do so?
I would. I don't know what particular laws or risks there would be in making it public, I don't want to speak for Andrea Campbell, who I have tremendous respect for. But I do think, this is, and I don't know if she used a grand jury and that's what's driving part of that, but to me now, this is the constant thing that I have to go through a lot. Public corruption matters, excessive use of force matters, this matter. You have to decide whether you use a grand jury or not, and that is a very difficult decision to make when you're starting an investigation because you don't know where it's going to lead you, right? And I would love to avoid that by the legislation I've already referenced.
Second question.
Yeah.
You said you were an altar boy.
I was.
You just said you're no longer a Catholic.
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with this story and the church's handling of this issue?
No. If I'm, try to be candid with you, my wife is an Episcopalian, and when we got married, she felt strongly about raising her children in the Episcopal Church, and so I went from St. Mark to St. Matthew's, and it took a while for my mother to talk to me and my aunt to talk to me. Really, my aunt said to me, my Aunt Gertrude said, "How did you get roped into that one?" She's standing right over there, so that's how it happened. Yeah, go ahead.
Two questions. You've got a lot of recommendations. What is the most important thing that can come out of this report? What would make the biggest difference in Rhode Island?
Oh, I think for survivors, and that's where my thinking always begins, is to establish those compensation programs and drop the opposition to this legislation. And if the diocese wanted a moment in time, they should come out and support it.
Legislation.
Pull back the lobbyists.
Annie's bill, Annie's law? Or?
Yeah. Pull back the lobbyists to send him home.
Yeah. And you mentioned Rep. Maginty yelling at you. I know you expected. The report to come out months ago.
I did.
What took so long?
Honestly, editing and polishing and making sure we were right. I want to give credit to this team. We went through this report, right, guys? Line by line. Are we right? Can we say this? Is this word choice the right word choice? Are we being fair? So this is why, Tim, I kind of bristle a little bit at that question, because these guys we asked our civil division to take a look too, and we had a bunch of people out there who helped proofread this for us because we wanted to make sure we didn't have any typos, and I hope we don't have any. But it just took a lot of time to make sure we were right and we were being fair. And part of it was on me. I took a lot of time last spring to go through it personally and make edits. I did it again in October. So we wanted, look, when you're leaving office, you know that there are going to be certain things that when you think about what you did here and what they think about what they did here, the people will remember you did it, good or bad, right? And so this is going to live on, notwithstanding what the diocese says is history. This is not going to be history. This is going to live on. And I wanted it to be a product that would reflect the level of ability in this office, which means outstanding lawyering, and I believe that it does that.
Did the diocese do anything to try to prevent its release?
No, nope. No, and, I think the other thing too is if you look at this group, right, they're all doing other things. That was the other challenge. So Dee obviously is running the whole operation effectively. Pat is our head of policy. Andrea runs our Medicaid fraud unit. Andrea. This is Massachusetts thing I keep doing. Andrea runs our Medicaid fraud unit. And then Sean is in our appellate unit. So part of what took a lot of time was people juggling other responsibilities and not having the ability to put people on it. And Penelope is not here. Where is she now? She was in our district. Is she back there?
Courtroom 14.
She's in courtroom. Hi, stand for us. Thank you. She's one of our young lawyers who's running around in court all the time. So younger lawyers, and so a lot of people were juggling other things. That was a big part of it. This office can be very reactive, Ed, as you've covered it for a long time, and so there are lots of things that push a 275-page document off your plate. Brown, for example, I don't know if I would have read it then, edited it then, but the team, Steve's got a million things to do. Is responding, Dee's responding, and so that's a lot of it. I mean, you've got something that in the scope of what we do here can wait, and so it waits, and it's unfortunate, but it's just the reality.
General, just
Tim.
my last question. The report said 250,000 supporting records that I think he says are in the cloud, on a server somewhere. So if a member of the public or the press wanted to review those records, to look at something more closely, do you see them as a public record subject to disclosure?
My view is I would like to make them public. It's going to be a challenge to do that, given the amount of records there are.
Yeah, not all 250,000. That would
Yeah,
be
but
ridiculous.
sure. But if you ask for a particular record, yeah, we would give it to you. Yeah. Well, Kelly, I'll come back. I'm not going to leave, but I'll come back to you. Yes, Chris.
What feedback did the diocese at all provide during at least its final review of this report?
Yeah.
That came out?
They wanted more time than we gave them. But I was keenly aware, and it was a fair request, and we did give them an additional 10 business days. So they had a total of 20 business days to review it. I mean, I read it, the last version, in 3 days, so, with interruptions. So it's long, but it's doable. That's what you got lawyers for. But then that, as I said, may be part of the problem. But they weren't pleased by it, but it is what it is.
So they didn't try to bring any changes for the final draft?
I don't know. They didn't, and had they, obviously, if we had said something that was flat out wrong, I certainly would have made the edit. But in terms of characterization, absent strong persuasion, I would have made those changes. Yes, hi.
Hello from the ground. I'm Leah from the AP. The church historically in Rhode Island and in New England was more than an institution, but part of the infrastructure of people's daily lives.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't really a scientific question, but I'm curious just anecdotally what you've seen and heard in the 25 years since the Spotlight report came out. How has this changed the infrastructure of people in Rhode Island's daily lives?
It's a great question. I don't know the answer. And I don't know. Rhode Island's really insular. And if you're covering for the AP, you may not be from here. Are you?
I'm from New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, yeah. Rhode Island's really insular. And I don't know to the extent to which something happens in Massachusetts. I'm sure people hear about it. But that's why I thought it was really important to do the report, to put it all together in one place. And the Spotlight team, I thought, obviously did a fantastic job with the Diocese of Archdiocese of Boston and drove significant change there. But I don't know how it changed Rhode Islanders' lives. I really don't. And I don't know to the extent that this will. But I don't think what happened in Boston really did. But I could be wrong.
What was the biggest surprise for you in this report? And did anything really, really stand out to you and has been seared into your consciousness?
Yeah, I think what I was just not aware of the scope of the diocese's poor response in terms of transfers. To me, it's the transfers that really get you, because every time you transfer a priest that you know is a threat to children and don't do anything in response, you're endangering other children, and I just don't know how you make that decision. I can't get my head around it. So I knew that happened. I mean, we all kind of know that anecdotally, but I don't think, at least I hadn't seen the scope of it until this was all put together. You know, tribute to the team for being able to tell the story in this way. It wasn't easy for them. Yes.
I just had one more question.
Okay.
Going forward, you're saying, or are you suggesting that the bishop and lawmakers who will be considering the pending legislation stop listening to legal counsel and follow their moral compass?
I do. That's exactly what I mean, Margie. Thanks for capturing it that way. Thanks. Anyone else? Hi.
So, reading the appendix, it's very clear that there are priests who are sent to places like New Mexico, which was, like, I reported in New Mexico. I'm very familiar with Temez Springs and the servants of Hercules. Can you talk a little bit about sort of where you can see the gaps and you don't have a record of someone being abused, but a priest is being sent to somewhere where abusive priests are being sent to when they abuse?
Yeah. So I think that's why, you know, we're pretty clear in the report that there's a lot of allegations in there. You know, 75 priests, 300 complainants, or 300 complaints, but we know that we didn't get it all for exactly that reason. You know, and we know that there were some files that apparently did not survive too. So, but I think that there's enough in there that tells the story, and I hope brings to survivors a sense of justice in some way. But you'd have to ask them. Yes, sir.
A very interesting result from this is your finding that so few cases were referred to the Vatican that in your judgment should have been.
Yeah.
In 2002, every diocese in the country filled out questionnaires that were summarized, as you know, in the John Jay report.
Yeah.
And in subsequent years, those surveys continued to be filled out for yearly updates. Did you get those surveys, and were you able to assess how well those reports were going?
Yeah, we viewed, it's in the report, and what we view the overall auditing is what the way it's described or was described to us, what we took from the records, is not overly robust, and it could be stronger. And I think, you know, and you do see this disparity across the country in the ways dioceses respond, and I think maybe the council, again, what do I know, but about how the church operates internally, maybe the Council of Bishops just needs to get everybody to the same place, and not make it optional to do the right thing, you know, to bring the force of collective morality to bear. Because some dioceses, from what I can tell from distance, certainly in terms of compensating survivors, appear to be doing the right thing and taking ownership. And I think that's what needs to happen here. Yes. Is there anybody else other than Kathy has a question? Because if not, I'll give you a shot. And then, do you have one? Okay. Go ahead, Kathy.
Just understanding this, the length of time, the MOU was in 2019.
16.
I'm sorry.
With Attorney General Martin? Mine.
No, yours.
2019.
Yours
Yes.
to get the documents.
Yes.
How did you get all the documents in one
No.
dump at some point, or the real question is, how recent are they in terms of the records held by the diocese on complaints and what they did with them?
Yeah.
Do they go right up into 2026?
Yeah, I think they do. Let me ask the team, how,
We got them over the entire period of time.
so all the way up through the last year?
Okay.
Anybody else? I'm sorry for the long, I'm gonna get crushed by Ian Donaldson as he hates long press conferences. Oh yeah, Heather, sorry. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Heather. I went on for so long I forgot the script.
Good morning. My name is Detective Lieutenant Heather Palumbo. I serve as the officer in charge of the Rhode Island State Police Special Victims Unit. Our primary involvement in this review was to help identify any cases where probable cause existed, the complainant and accused were still alive, and the statute of limitations had not expired. From the onset, Our unit approached this investigation using a trauma-informed response. That meant allowing survivors to share their experience at their own pace, prioritizing their dignity and well-being, and recognizing the long-term impact trauma can have on memory and disclosure. To the survivors who trusted us with their stories, thank you. We know that coming forward can reopen painful memories. I want to acknowledge the exceptional work of the detectives assigned to the Special Victims Unit. These cases are complex, emotionally demanding, and often span many, many years. I am proud of their work. The Rhode Island State Police Special Victims Unit will continue to monitor a dedicated clergy abuse hotline. The hotline is to report clergy sexual abuse or related crimes. We want survivors and anyone with information to know that it is never too late to come forward, even if the abuse occurred many, many years ago. The phone number to the hotline is 401-764-0142. I want to thank the survivors, the Office of the Attorney General, and all those who contributed to this effort. Thank you.
Welcome in.
Send me over these ones. Thank you. Thank you, General.
Sure.
You know, before I start what I was going to say, I wanted to piggyback on something General Neronha said about the diocese taking responsibility. You know, shame is something that almost every survivor I've ever met feels about what happened to them. And it is time for the diocese to feel ashamed. They should be not only responsible legally, they should be ashamed of the people, the children that they put in harm's way. And now I'll go into my nice speech. Shame really has to change sides. I've been waiting for this report for a very long time, and this day is so very important to me. My husband will tell you I've been crazy the last week. He's right. I first publicly called for the diocese to release their files in 2003, and there were survivors, Rhode Island survivors before me that were calling for it much earlier. I begged former AGs to do an investigation, to no avail. And finally, in July 2019, Attorney General Peter Neronha stepped up to the plate and started this investigation in earnest. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart, General Neronha. And I thank Adi Goldstein, Sean Malloy, Andrea Morrow, Patrick Dolan, and the members of the state police and the rest of the team for all your hard work. I know it was a difficult road, and it was very frustrating and surely heartbreaking along the way. It's heartbreaking just to watch this, and I've been doing this for many, many years. While you have been doing your investigation, my sister, Rep. Carol McEntee, and I, and others have been on a parallel path trying to find justice and protect children through the legislative process. Our path was equally heartbreaking and frustrating, and I thank everybody that has helped us. From the bottom of my heart for your perseverance, resilience, and dedication. But today, for the first time, the people of Rhode Island can see the complicity of the Providence Diocese in a crime wave of child sexual abuse spanning more than 7 decades in black and white. I've heard the stories of thousands of survivors over the years in my role as New England SNAP leader, as a survivor myself in groups, as a therapist to survivors. In the spring, in May, I was at the Vatican for the Papal Conclave, trying to make child abuse one of the things that they use to choose the new pope. And the enormity of the crime wave of child abuse around the world by Catholic clerics was sometimes just too hard to bear, and I had to walk away and cry. But nothing's worse than hearing what it's like in my own hometown in Rhode Island. This report should make Rhode Island Catholics and non-Catholics alike gasp in horror at the organized culture of cover-up. The diocese protected scores of pedophiles while they silenced their young victims over at least 7 decades. And you've heard many of these instances. After it sinks in, I hope you will join me and say, never again. The only way to stop this culture of protecting their own is through consequences. Today, the diocesan lawyers do everything they can to prevent victim stories from being heard, and by fighting them in court and at the State House. The diocese is actively lobbying against our revised Annie's bill, which would hold them financially accountable. Meanwhile, the diocese continues to financially support many of the pedophiles in this report, paying them retirement salary, health benefits, and more. You should be outraged by this. I am. Ask any survivor who's tried to get justice or personnel files or even a sympathetic pastoral response from the diocese. Most of us will tell you the same story. The process in dealing with the Diocese of Providence is a second layer of abuse and trauma. I dealt with my childhood abuse in a therapist's office years ago, but I continue to be traumatized by this process of seeking justice. As you know, the report was based on mountains of files provided voluntarily by the diocese to the AG's office, and they never once agreed to come in and answer questions. It is impossible for me to believe that the Providence Diocese is suddenly totally transparent. The Catholic Church has been secretive for 2,000 years, and the Vatican still expects that abuse reports be reported directly to them in Rome, not to local law enforcement. Given that, this investigation is truly remarkable in what it could uncover under those circumstances. Excuse me for a second. Like the Epstein files, the closer you look at this report, the more you will see how insidious the culture of cover-up is. The Epstein files exposed powerful and wealthy people trafficking and abusing children and young women. This report recounts in detail how scores of trusted clerics preyed on the children of Rhode Island. The diocese, by reassigning priests to new unsuspecting parishes and more children, did the trafficking. They moved the abusers, not the children, but the result was the same. On a personal note, this report finally declared me credible. You have no idea how important this is to me. To be deemed non-credible by the diocese for the last 32 years has haunted me in ways I cannot begin to describe. In our parish alone, the man who abused me was the pastor in our parish for many decades. But it cannot be a coincidence that 6 credibly accused pedophile priests served at Sacred Heart Church along with him, my home parish. The next steps, I think General Neronha described them very well. We have to not let the diocese go back to business as usual. We need to demand that they stop discrediting victims in the courtrooms and in the State House. We need to demand that continued oversight by law enforcement. We need to change the grand jury law that prevented this from being a truly in-depth investigation of the diocese. And last but most important to me, contact your legislators. Insist that they pass this year's revised Annie's bill. Then we can be sure that the diocese and other complicit organizations will be held legally accountable. Lawsuits expose the truth and protect our children from the predators out there. Before I end, I'd like to say one last thing. Childhood sexual abuse is hard to read about, and it's very sad. It's much easier to turn away. But if we all look away, the children who are in danger today have no hope of protection. If we all look away, the young people who have not yet come forward will be silenced in advance. This report is 400 pages of men's cruelty to children and its diabolical cover-up. Read it, please read it. Read it in sections or all in one sitting, or skim it and then go back. By reading it, you honor the children who were hurt. It will make you want to protect the children who have not been hurt yet. Together we can do that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can we have your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Ann Hagen Webb,
H-A-G-E-N?
A.M.
A-N.
Webb,
Webb.
W-E-B-B.
And you're with SNAP?
No, no longer with staff. I used to be.
How are you?
I'm a survivor, I'm an advocate, and I'm a psychologist who specializes in childhood sexual abuse, particularly clergy abuse.
And you're my sister.
And I'm Carol's sister.
All right, thanks. Thank you. Well said. Now I want to introduce Dr. Hupp Brennan. Hupp.
Excellent. Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you, General. Let me begin by also thanking the Attorney General and his excellent staff for their work. Quite simply, they recognized the gravity of this and they did something about it. The investigative courage demonstrated here rivals the work of the Boston Globe Spotlight investigation into the Boston Archdiocese in 2002, and it is equally groundbreaking. The report, as you've seen, is both robust and exhaustive, outlining behavior that is grotesque and shocking to the senses. It objectively details and confirms what many have long known and some of us have lived through. That the Catholic Church, including the Diocese of Providence, has essentially overseen a child sex ring for generations. This is a situation where, as one looks more and more closely at the details, it becomes increasingly reprehensible. At the same time, taking a step back and looking at the issue as a whole, locally, nationally, globally, its enormity is stunning. The permissive and accepting environment within its parishes, marked by secrecy, complacency, and an unspoken code, cultivated an internal belief that it was somehow acceptable for men in robes to rape children. As a friend who is a priest within the diocese once confided, we asked for it, and now we've got it. Beyond the atrocities themselves, the grooming that preceded the crimes, and the betrayal of trust that followed, that reveals the depth of the depravity to which these priests descended. Aided and abetted by the Diocese of Providence, they placed their perverted desires and self-protection ahead of their spiritual mission. If one wants to learn the teachings of Jesus Christ, they should read the Bible. If one wishes to understand the Catholic Church, they need only to read this report. It's mandatory reading for anyone with children in this or any organization where a child is left unsupervised with an adult. Abuse can occur in a moment, yet its effects last a lifetime. Those who donate money or transfer assets to the church may also want to give it a read. Regarding the bishop's recent claim that this is all behind us, I wish that were true. However, pedophilia exists as an aberration of nature, and it always will. Perpetrators are drawn to and thrive within hierarchical organizations where opportunity and trust abound. Grooming follows, then the crime, and by then it's too late. A life has been ruined, or in some cases lost. Parents and guardians, I beg you to be cautious. Trust in your deity, yet guard your children fiercely against false prophets. Today, thanks to this report, we have a public record of deviant and criminal conduct that has been kept hidden for far too long. Angela Walker, the executive director of the Survivors Network for Those Abused by Priests, hit the nail on the head recently, noting that financial settlements alone cannot repair decades of harm. Institutions must confront the systems that enabled the abuse and secrecy in the first place. This report is a major step forward in delivering that accountability. There's more work to be done for sure, but this is an extraordinary report of the Attorney General and his team, and it has brought us closer to ever to that goal. And for that, I and all of the survivors of the church's abuse are profoundly grateful.
Excellent.
Thank you, General.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're through. All right, everybody, thanks so much for coming.